Hello, I'm Kay Fowler, and I have another story for you today. My first story was the story of Bill Ballinger, who's my daddy, but I have another story today, and it's about my Uncle Roy Suttles. James Roy Suttles. He was Papa and Granny Suttles, this boy, and I want to tell you all about him. Papa and Granny Suttles were great prayer warriors. And I know it was their prayers that brought him through into many healings and brought him home safely. A few weeks ago, the Lord gave me a short dream, and it was about me and Granny. We had went shopping, and Granny and I were very close. We made some trips together, and she lived with us for a while, and we lived in her house when we first got married. But this dream, we had went shopping, and we went into one of the stores in the mall, and she went over to where they were selling the aprons, and she picked up an apron. And Granny loved aprons. She wore them every day, and for a while she would make them, sewed them, and sold them for a while. And I have one of them. But she held this apron up to her. It was long, and it covered her whole bodice. And it was long enough that it reached to the top of her shoes, and she loved it. Well, so I went over and I picked up one, and I held it up to myself, and it covered my bodice, and then it was to the top of my shoes. It was a big, long apron. And I woke up, and the first word that I heard spoken was covering. So that's what the Lord was saying, covering. And my mind immediately went to how Papa and Granny prayed over Uncle Roy. Oh, they prayed for him all during the war and afterwards, and brought him through so much. And that's what the Lord was telling me. Cover those that need prayer. Cover those that you love and that you're praying for. But keep covering. Keep covering. Don't stop. I remember Granny Suttles, when she would pray, you could hear her all over the house. They were great warriors, prayer warriors. But now I want to read to you what I wrote, because one day I sat down with my Uncle Roy, and he told me all these wonderful, exciting stories, and I wrote them all down. So I'll begin. Our Papa and Granny Suttles really believed in prayer. We watched them practice it daily. You could hear Granny all over the house as she prayed. Their son Roy joined the Navy and was in World War II and the Korean War. Their prayers followed him into the Atlantic and the Pacific and brought him safely back home. The following stories are a few examples of the power of praying godly parents. Roy remembers the time he was on an aircraft carrier working on the bow of the deck of the ship. Sometimes the planes that landed would have hung rockets, one that didn't deploy. So that day someone yelled, "Hung rocket!" He looked up and saw a rocket that had come loose from the belly of the plane just as it was landing, and was sliding down the deck of the ship toward him. He and his buddies dove over the side of the ship, thinking they had dove into the ocean, where they probably would never have survived. But it turned out to be a kind of a safety deck under the main deck. They were safe, and the rocket skidded on past and over the deck into the ocean. Once in the South Pacific, he remembered the time 4 depth charges had gotten jammed up under the wings of a plane. Roy was working as a plane mechanic on a ship. The ship was in harbor. The seaplanes, having returned from their missions, would land in the harbor and tie up to the buoys that were all along the harbor, and here they would refuel. It was Roy's job to crawl out to the wing, bring back the fuel tank for refueling. One particular time, as he was crawling out onto the wing, he heard some yelling of his fellow sailors. The motorboat that brought him out to this plane had suddenly sped away to the far shore. Well, he crawled back out of the plane and yelled, "Hey, you guys, what are you doing over there? Come back and get me." They hollered back to him, "Look!" So he turned and looked up under the wing. There he could see 4 depth charges that had jammed and were just a couple of inches away from falling from their nest. An explosion could be any second. They yelled, "Be ready to jump into the boat. We're only going to slow down a little and swing by to get you." He leapt off of the wing and narrowly avoided being blown to kingdom come. At another time, Roy remembered being the flight engineer on a flight from Athens, Greece to North Africa. The fog was so thick they couldn't get high enough to get over it or low enough to get under it. Having become lost, they flew low over the road to see if they could read the signs, but that was no good. They finally got in touch with Libya airfield. They said, "You must land. You've come this far, you have to be out of fuel." When they were able to land, they put the dipstick to see what they did have left. They had 50 gallons left. The pilot looked at Roy and said, "How can this be? You were ordered to only put in so much." Roy replied, "I always put in 100 gallons extra for me and my family." That plane would have spun into the ocean if he had not done so. Once in World War II, he was flying a seaplane. It was a beautiful night and a bright full moon, and they needed to land. The moon was shining on the river, which was at the end of the runway, and the river looked like the runway. They touched down and almost landed in the river. Where they did touch down, though, was at the very end of the runway, where there was a large runway lights every 2 feet. The plane had skidded and was bouncing left to right, each time hitting a light. He expected the plane to flip over at any moment. When they finally got stopped, they checked the plane. There were no holes, not even scratches after hitting all those lights. Uncle Roy had a friend that was on the Indianapolis. The ship was torpedoed and sank. 2,000 men went into the water. 5 days later, there were only 100. The sharks had come every day and every night. But his friend had made it to shore floating on a piece of scrap from the ship. When that sailor got to the States, he became a preacher, and so did his son. But Roy's ship had to retrieve the bodies that would come to the top of the water. The only place to keep all those bodies was in the freezer, where the food was kept. He said he couldn't eat for a whole week. It was 1967. Roy was back in the States, living in Springfield, Massachusetts. He had developed bleeding ulcers. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and he awoke in excruciating pain. He realized they must be perforated. He somehow made it to the military hospital. They thought he was dying, and they put him in a back room. He was so doubled over in pain he couldn't even straighten up. At 8 o'clock, another doctor came in to see him and ordered x-rays. Roy was ready to give up. The pain was so great that he didn't want to live. The doctor immediately took him to surgery. The doctor opened him from top to bottom and there discovered gangrene from top to bottom with such peritonitis. They inserted many tubes to begin draining all the infection out. The doctors had little hope that he might live. Then he developed high fever and went into a coma. When he finally awoke, the doctor told him how bad he really was and that he had given him a pig stomach and an esophagus transplant. A pig esophagus also transplant. But it hadn't worked. He had no chance to live. As he pushed him over in a corner out of the way, he left to call Roy's mama to come to get the body. When she got the phone call, she called Pastor Jim Lee from Arden. Together they went to Massachusetts. Roy woke up with Jim Lee and his mama leaning over him. The nurse ran to get the doctor, so shocked to see Roy awake. As the doctor turned to Roy, as the doctor hurried in, Roy said, "Hey, Doc, is it all right if I go down to the lounge? I've got company." As the doctor stared in unbelief, he replied, "Well, we'd better wait a day or two." The patient across the hall said, "Man, when that preacher came in the door, you could hear him all over the hospital. Man, he was a-praying. And the next thing we knew, you were talking." Roy fully recovered. He still has the pig stomach and the pig esophagus. Roy had been out of the Navy for 2 years and was living in Norfolk, Virginia. He was working in a factory that rebuilt planes that he had flown. One day he felt he was coming down with the flu or the pneumonia, and he went to sick bay. After examining him, they determined it was pneumonia and they put him in the hospital. At the hospital, they discovered that he had tuberculosis instead. He had to make arrangements for his wife to bring some clothes to the hospital, and he was preparing to go into quarantine. His children and wife had to take shots. The quarantine unit turned out to be an old trailer, not fit for dogs to live in, and much less humans, with one doctor and one nurse there. So he settled in for what turned out to be 3 months. Every day he would wash in disinfectant, gown up with a mask, walk across the hallway to the examining room. There they would test him down his throat to see what kind of TB he had. After the 3 months, they had determined what kind he had and what kind of medicine it would take to fight it. Then they gave him several TB hospitals to choose from where he would be treated. Luckily, there was one in Otene, North Carolina, not far from his hometown of Arden. They offered to take him in an ambulance, but he declined. Instead, his dad and his brother Wilburn came after him. He started out wearing a mask, but his brother made him take it off. When they arrived in Otene at the hospital, Roy's daddy told him, "Branch Bishop, a prayer warrior, man of God at their church, said to tell you that when you got to the Otene hospital, they won't find TB." Well, 6 to 8 hours later, after examining him, the doctor said, "We see the scars where you had it, but you don't have it now." God had worked a healing miracle, just like the man of God had said. Got some more. There was a time in his life where Roy felt he hadn't really given his all to the Lord. But then he heard a voice say, "You're living for the devil." Roy responded, "What? That can't be. I've given up drinking and smoking and carousing with women. I am living for the Lord." For 2 solid weeks he wept and prayed day and night. Finally, peace and realization came that just because he had quit sinning and started going to church, he had not experienced salvation nor fulfilled the command, "You must be born again." He had been living for the devil, but now he belonged to the Lord. While in Biloxi, Mississippi, Roy developed bad pain in his hip. He could hardly walk. So we went in for x-rays and an MRI. It took all day long. He started at 8 a.m. and now he was on his way home at 9 p.m. The thought bone cancer came to him strongly, and he said, "God, we've got to talk about this. I'm going to have to call on to you for help for my healing." He just went on talking to him. Suddenly he realized that the pain was gone. Oh, he got so excited, such joy flooded over him. He just went on praising him on his way home. 2 weeks later, he went back and found that the cancer had gone all the way around the hip, but it had stopped right where the pain had been at the very moment he called on the Lord. The cancer had stopped in its tracks, and he never had another pain. It was gone. Once after having prostate cancer surgery, and the doctor thought he had gotten it all, he came in to tell him that the cancer was going all through his body. He told him he had to start taking shots. Roy then moved to the coast and had to have more shots in the stomach. These shots were so painful when they were screwed down to the stomach. One day he felt so strongly, "Stop taking the shots. God can heal me." The next trip, as he went in the office, he said, "Doc, I ain't taking the shots anymore. I'm finished." The doctor said, "I'll have to do radical surgery." "Well, whatever you have to do, but I'm through," he said. The doctor then said, "Well, come every 3 weeks and we'll test you." The very next visit, his blood test was way down, almost normal. Then in 3 more weeks, the blood test was normal, and the cancer was gone. Roy was living in Tampa, Florida. In this development, all of the houses looked the same, with 10 feet separating the houses. All were the same color, with a 4x6 screened porch and 1 chair. It was noon, and Paula, Roy's daughter, whom he lived with, had gone to work that morning. He decided to go shopping and hurried out of the door, pulling the locked door behind him. He suddenly realized he didn't have his keys or phone. He quickly turned the doorknob. Yes, it was locked, and it was a hot day. The sun was looking down on that screen porch. He quickly tried all the windows and the other door. All were locked. He hurried next door. No one was home. And he went to the other neighbors. No one was home there either. There were no stores within walking distance. He walked to the end of the street and did find a guy in a pickup truck talking on a phone. He did let him use the phone, but as he was dialing Paula, he knew she wouldn't answer, not recognizing the number. So he walked back home. Oh, Florida, summers can be hot. He was thirsty, sweat was pouring, and there was no bathroom. Lord, what am I going to do? I can start walking. I may not make it. Something told him to try again, even after trying so many times. Well, I'll try one more time, he thought to himself. Just as his hand was about to touch the knob, it turned, and the door opened by itself. He even had the thought, who's in my house? It was the Lord. The Lord was in his house. Roy had always taught his children, always keep their eyes on the road when driving. Just look straight ahead, he told them. One day Roy was on his way to the market, and he broke his own rule. Something caught his eye to the left, and he took his eyes off the road. After a few seconds of looking to the left, he quickly looked ahead. He realized the traffic had sped up, and he had gotten left behind. So he stomped the gas and zoomed ahead. There was a van right in front of him. He suddenly had a vision of himself crashed into the back of that van. He was inside it. He then heard a voice say, turn, turn, now. And another voice said, no, don't turn, it's too late. The first voice again said, turn, turn. Then someone turned the wheel. Roy ended up stopped beside the van. The crash had been avoided by an unseen hand. I want to say that there's power in prayer. Great power in prayer. And I encourage you, put a covering over yourself. Put a covering over your children, your grandchildren, and your loved ones, whomever, your spouse. Prayer can accomplish great things. There's power in prayer. God bless you. Oh, I also wanted to tell you that Uncle Roy is living in Mississippi, and he's 102. Now, this is December 17, 2024, and he is living a nice long life. He's 102. Praise the Lord. Oh, there's power in prayer, power to spare. All that you'll ever need is waiting right there. Just a few words, childlike faith, and it's goodbye despair. Oh, there's power, so much power. There's power in prayer. A bed holds a body and is periled with pain. The doctors have all tried, but their hope is in vain. Oh, but wait, someone's praying in the midst of the gloom, and all at once the great physician comes into the room. Oh, there's power in prayer, power to spare. All that you'll ever need is waiting right there. Just a few words, childlike faith, and it's goodbye despair. Oh, there's power, so much power. There's power in prayer.